we were talking about earlier before we started recording both of our relationships with it. First time I ever saw The Exorcist, I didn't like it. And I actually saw it when I was a teenager. I was with my dad and my sister. It was a rare occasion where, for whatever reason, I have no idea why, I can't remember why, but my mom was out of town and we rented a bunch of movies. And my dad was like, let's watch The Exorcist. And like, okay, Dad. Um, it's just a funny thought process. Like, oh, I guess that's definitely a mom is out of town movie to watch The Exorcist. But no, it's not that we were very restricted in terms of what we viewed, but at the same time, watching that movie as a teenager, and maybe particularly in that environment with my sister and my dad, and the reputation around the film itself, I didn't know what to expect. But what I got was a movie that all I could take from it was the obscenity. That was basically the only thing on my first viewing that I remembered was, the obscene nature of some of the parts of the movie. And I basically didn't think it had any substance after that first viewing. But again, I was a teenager and my taste evolved and changed. And over the years, and it was a long time before I rewatched it because I didn't care for it the first time. But I kept thinking about how much I liked William Friedkin. I liked other movies that he made, the cast of the film I liked, and other things. The movie itself, the movie itself has this incredible reputation, and I thought I kind of owe this movie another watch.
Right. Yeah.
And then I did, and I was like, oh, it's a masterpiece. Where have I been this whole time? And it was such an unusual change in my perception of the movie. But it really has gotten better. The more I've grown older, the more I've revisited it, the more I guess my taste in cinema has evolved and changed over the years. Holy cow, it's such a great and, nay, I even say beautiful movie. Certainly not just about the shock value, even though the shock value is something that is very apparent for like 1973, because you're talking about, 5 years after the rating system, the MPAA rating system was invented, which means that the standards for what you could get in a movie had radically evolved. And so some of the more obscene or graphic aspects of the movie, no wonder the movie was kind of a sensation to some degree because of just the sheer shock of what you were seeing on the screen. It had never happened before.
Right.
And from a little girl, no less. Like, that's
Yeah.
understandably quite a shocking thing. And it's also going a tiny tangent here, just talking about the 1970s, which is my favorite year favorite decade for movies. Part of the reason it was so great really isn't anything to do with the rating system, even though that was there. But it was the changing of the guard. A lot of the people that had been the old Hollywood establishment, they were moving on and had new people coming in and kind of almost taking advantage of it in a way, and standards changing, and they had a freedom that had not really been the case in movies in quite that way. So you had this whole new generation of filmmakers coming in and really just kind of putting their stamp on cinema, and it was the director's decade. It was really kind of incredible to see that kind of naturalism and that kind of voice and vision that happened. And actually, the three movies that we're talking about on this episode kind of moves us into the modern blockbuster, as previously mentioned, to a certain degree. Like, not to step ahead of myself here, but like that's part of the evolution of where we get now, so many decades later. Very different state of cinema. Not to say it's a bad state of cinema, just to say that television has almost become more of a free thing than the cineplexes. But the 1970s was very free for film and for directors. Yeah, The Exorcist is a keen example of how in the world is this a big studio movie. We don't see enough of these types of big studio movies, frankly. What's your take, Drew, on The Exorcist.
Well, I have a similar beginning with it in that I saw it. I believe I was somewhere between the ages of 13 and 15. Around 1999, they did a re-release with the version you've never seen, a kind of extended cut of the film came out, and I didn't see it in theater or anything because it was definitely a banned movie in my household. I wouldn't have been able to watch it with my parents. I watched it at a friend's house. They had it on DVD, uh, and it had this reputation of a blurb. Really, is the scariest movie of all time. And well, you see it, and as a 13, 14, however old I was, I just, it wasn't the scariest movie of all time, and I I think I was kind of like you. I definitely the vulgarity of it, the obscenity. It was almost comical to me because I just didn't really understand the power or the terror of someone actually being possessed. I think because I didn't, that wasn't necessarily something that scared me. Again, passing of time and adjusting of tastes, I watched it again as well and appreciated it a lot more. But this time around, I can say without hesitation that, and I probably would have been the same way after the first rewatch, but especially after this one, this is easily one of the best horror films ever, and it would be in my top 10, top five. It would be in my top list, and I think the reason is just of how deliberate the movie is. It's very slow paced, but that's not a bad thing. A lot of times we've both discussed this. People will say, "Oh, that movie's not paced well if it's slow." But honestly, a well-paced movie doesn't mean it's fast all the time. You can be too fast, you can be too slow, but there's that, you know, combination of being just right. Once this movie gets going toward the end, it doesn't let off the gas. When getting started, there's all these pieces that have to be put in place. We have Father Karras played by Jason Miller, and he has kind of a completely. It doesn't really seem like it's connected uh, to the story at first, and I think that's a good thing. It's kind of realistic because a lot of movies, everyone's destined to end up like part of a story, and this one's very natural in the way the story unfolds and the way people end up involved in the story. I like how it progresses, but he's a priest. He's a psychiatrist as well in the church, and he's kind of going through an underdog kind of story that his mother that he she's getting all these kind of her caretaker, but he's also in the church, so he's away from her, and she goes through a lot of misfortune. He does with her, and she passes away, and we see kind of his evolution. He talks with another father and talks about he thinks that he is losing his faith, and he's kind of burnt out on dealing with the problems of others, and also not being able to handle the problems in his own life. We also have the story of Reagan and her mother, and her mother is an actress working in Georgetown. They're filming a movie on campus, and they're living in this really nice house there in Georgetown. And Reagan is just a sweet, played by Linda Blair, and a legendary performance. She's very good in this movie, and that's putting it mildly. But when she's unpossessed, she's just a sweet little girl, and and it's no mistake that that hits me a little different as a father now than it did as a as a little annoying teenager. Um, I'm much more able to see the the terror of that. But it's not like she's just instantly possessed. It takes a little time for things to unfold, and I think that's great because it gives it time to really simmer and for it to really have an impact. And of course, Ellen Bernstein playing her mom, she's going through all this frustration of trying to find out what's wrong with Reagan, and her performance is amazing as well. It's very believable that trying to diagnose, and these doctors can't come up with a good excuse. They don't know what's wrong with her. How can they? It's it's a demonic possession, but it doesn't come with a tag that says that's what it is. At first it's just a few things like the bed shaking, she's being rocked back and forth on the bed, and then it gets a lot darker. And the scene where the doctors come in to see her when she really is kind of gone, and it's really quick, it's really violent and terrifying all at once. I and you can't have this movie without Max von Sydow as Father Marin, who we get introduced to at the beginning with some really eerie and um, interesting. The way this was, I remember when I saw this thinking, what does this have to do with anything? But I love the way that that we're introduced to him, and that the way that we're introduced to the idea of this demon who in the book and in the subsequent sequels is identified as Pazuzu. What a fun name. But anyway, uh, and thankfully Pazuzu is never named in this film.
I'm the devil.
Yeah, which is a great moment, a great moment in the film that's actually used by Father Karras to kind of say, well, I'm not sure this is a possession, because it's common for schizophrenic patients to identify themselves as that. He says he might as well said she's Napoleon Bonaparte.
Right. Yeah.
And I've I think that's the demon playing games. And it's brilliant. I love the way that the demon is, or Pazuzu is, as a character. It's very interesting to just the way, because that's one thing I think, the shock factor, all the crazy stuff that is said. I think that kind of overshadows it for some people, and I understand why people might be uncomfortable, especially the very religious. It is a very shocking movie, if but it's the very nature of the story, though. I don't feel like it's unnecessary. I feel like it fits the tone of this movie. But touching back on Father Marin real quick, he's been in another country, Iraq, digging, and he sees this statue, and the tone, the eeriness of it, the the setup for what it unfolds is amazing. And I love that stretch of the movie. Now this is completely different than I felt about it the first time I saw it. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the movie is the beginning. I When Father Marin shows up, this just that's the poster. That's the one of the most iconic shots of the movie. Not the demon, but Father Marin standing in front of the house in the fog. And to me, he's almost as terrifying as the demon, would like in a good way. Like his presence when he shows up, it's just like, oh boy. Uh, just the way they built him up, the other priests talking about Father Marin off, while he's off camera, building him up. I just love, of course, Max von Sydow is just he's a great, one of the great actors we ever had. But he is aged up in this film. It's he's played an old man his whole career. It feels like, uh, but he is great in this film, and isn't in it a lot, but he sticks with you quite a bit. I mentioned, Father Karras's faith, and I like that, it's more about him than Marin, because Marin's kind of the shining light, and he is the experienced one. But I'm glad we're going through the point of view of Father Karras, because he ultimately ends up being the one that has to make the leap of faith and the choices, and it's very well earned. We've seen him go through some, absolute tragedy in the movie. We've seen him, get confronted with this exorcism, and he, doesn't necessarily believe in it. He is eventually, confronted with the fact that it is very real. And I love the exorcism scene that, Father Marin is just 100% invested, going in on Pazuzu, using these rites, and Father Karras is just aghast, shocked, because it's real, and he's seeing all these crazy things like Reagan's body levitating and all this other, insane things, lightning and all sorts of other stuff happening. And he doesn't he's supposed to be saying these response rites as well. And Father Marin has to constantly, stay on top of him to keep him in, because he is very shocked and scared. And I love that about this movie, because it's not like they just go in and they're 100% able to and prepared to deal with this. Ultimately, the way it ends up, and Father Marin has had a heart condition that's hinted at, and he passes away in the middle of this, probably because he's going way too hard in on those the power of Christ compels you. Of he's pretty gung ho with that the first time he says that. I just love that character though, but I love that moment when Karras finds him, and for his first response is just anger and hatred, but he sees that that he's wailing on a little girl, the moment before when Reagan's mom is like, is she gonna die? You kind of see it in his face. He's made the decision that whatever it costs, he is not gonna let it kill Reagan, not let it be the end of her, and he ends up, taking on the demon, tells it to take him, and sacrifices himself and throws himself out the window. It's such a great story, and it's so well done, and I know this might seem a little bizarre coming from the movie with all the obscenity and shit, but this is just a classy, the way it's told, the way it's handled. it's just a classic story. And this, I give it an A plus. This is just, it's one of the best movies, period, but definitely one of the best horror films of all time. And I definitely understand why there are people out there that are probably a little more hesitant to watch it, or don't care for it. But I completely understand, and don't look down on people who don't, that's not their thing. But I do think that this movie has a reputation it earned. It's fantastic. It's well done. It's well filmed. It's just a beautiful, as you said, beautifully told. And I don't know if I have too much else to say other than that it's just that good.
We referenced the opening stretch of the movie, and I mean, I agree with really everything you said, but thinking about that opening stretch, it adds this epic feeling to what's about to follow. That's a
Yeah.
huge part of the success of the movie because it could have started small. It could have just started with Reagan and Chris and just started with their small family story and evolved to the point of realizing demonic possession, you know. But instead, it starts with Father Marin and this whole Middle Eastern journey, you know, like, and it just adds this gravitas,
Right.
which Max von Sydow already adds gravitas just by being there. It's uh, kind of always been his modus operandi, you know, the adding gravitas to anything, including many a genre film. But obviously, he's been in so many great movies. Seventh Seal being a chief among them. Definitely known to many because of the way he's popped up in so many genre films, even in recent years. But he just immediately lands this level of import.
Right.
And when he shows up at the ending, obviously the iconic shot, but even when they're walking up and Karis is wanting to like, oh, let me get you keyed into the story, and I got to tell you about who this girl actually is and what I witnessed so far from all these demons. It appears to be multiple demons, and he's immediately shot down. It's only one, and
Yeah.
I just absolutely love that, you know, because it's not that Marin is callously bringing him down. He's just he already knows what he's walking into. He's already like not that he by any means obviously he does care. It's certainly not that he doesn't care about the person that he's trying to save, but he walks into that room knowing steadfast, get rid of the demon. I'm focused on this task, and I'm not gonna pay heed to the demon and any manipulation that the demon is going to try to do. He's already in the right state of mind, basically. And
Right.
like you said, in terms of having to get Karis back on track, you know, uh, right back into the rights, because Karis is just so taken by, you know, the spectacle and the terror of that spectacle. And Marin is 100% just, this is what we got to do, believe in Christ and cast out the demon, and, you know, just 100% keyed in.
Right.
It's just a powerful thing, and Max von Sydow is a huge part of the success of the movie. And Ellen Burstyn is one of my favorite actors. Period. Seeing her, you know, as this mother fraught dealing with her daughter, and also being a person of science herself, you know, like believer in science and wanting to do something, but also realizing what she's seeing and frustrated that nobody's really taking this in a serious light. Everybody has this rationalization that walks in the face of what's actually happening and what's even happening in front of their own faces. She's like looking them in the eyes and like, did you not just see that? Did you not? How are you treating this? Oh, it's just a mental break. You know, it's just a break in her mind, and oh, it's just a extra power that she has because of that mental break. Certainly not a demon. That's not rational. And that's also a part of the movie too, is how they, many fantasy stories or modern fantasy stories deal with it in the same way. The idea that uh, something that has been myth is coming back. Game of Thrones does that. Like, oh, dragons. Like, who really believes in dragons ever having been a thing? And then, of course, you see dragons being born. Obviously, it's a very different thing than demons, but hopefully, you take my point. It's like this, it's the success of the story in kind of making this mythological power into something real and tangible. And that's a huge part of the success of The Exorcist and Linda Blair being fantastic. And I'm certainly not wanting to take away from her performance, but obviously it was manipulated a lot too,
Right.
where she didn't know everything that was happening in the story, thank goodness.
Right.
But
Right.
the movie, I think, very much belongs to Jason Miller and like the whole storyline that Karis has. Like that's really the heart and soul of the movie, and that's something that I don't think I, obviously, like, as mentioned, appreciated the first time I watched it. A part of what I didn't appreciate was Jason Miller's journey in the movie, and even though it's tragic and horrific toward the end, it's also a tremendous act of heroism, and that's the moving part of it is watching him be that hero and get to the point that he would make that choice and make that leap, so to speak, quite literally.
Right.
But regardless of which, like when you have those moments of him dealing with his mom, or that, there's so many haunting shots in this. That, and obviously the finale is a big, big part of those iconic haunting images. But when he sees his mom on the bed,
Oh yeah.
is just that it doesn't have the linger on it. And that's another thing that this movie does so successfully, is it doesn't have to expound on anything really.
No.
It just kind of has this naturalism and lets it unfold as it would. And it just has to do this in tiny increments. Just that one image is enough for you to get how this demon is playing with Karis and trying to manipulate him. And it works at times. you know, it's trying to break him. But that is that is a haunting image, and I'm also haunted by the image of when Marion is dead and Karis walks in, and uh, the Reagan thing is standing at the foot of the bed.
Yes.
Oh my God, that is just like I said, just that one image. You don't have to expound on that at all. It's just you see that, and the gravity of it is felt, and the potential beyond that is already known. So it's terrifying. Terrifying in terms of what it can mean for their souls, basically, and that's what's being fought for in so many ways. Yeah, it's just a powerful movie, and it's terrifying, but it's terrifying in a very specific kind of way, in an atmospheric kind of way. I could understand how it could be uh, seen differently, in terms of feeling that it's gimmicky or feeling that it's just obscene, but that would be to miss all the underlying power of the story. And I think the great way in which it is told. I 100% agree with A plus. Like 'cause it's just that good of a movie, and that classic of a movie,
Yes.
a classical, well told story that's just really hard to beat, honestly. And it also has to be mentioned, the score to the film, which adds immensely to the atmosphere and obviously the iconography as well. Tubular bells.
It's easily one of the most memorable and haunting horror film themes. I think you can, put it put it next to Psycho. I think you can put it next to Halloween, um, and I think you could put it next to Jaws as some of the most memorable and lasting and perfect, pitch perfect horror film scores, and it fits right there. Just the first time we hear it, it's nothing particularly scary is happening, but the atmosphere of the movie, and you point that out well. This film thrives on the atmosphere, and that is what sells it. I mean, there is a heart to the story, and then there is good writing and good acting, and it's all pitch perfect too. But the atmosphere is what really, you know, sets this one completely apart. And the music has just the few times we do hear that theme, it plays a significant role in that, and just a kind of a foreboding and a chilling sensation that it brings.
And even the absence of music at plenty of points too, you know.
Definitely. And there, that adds to the tension. uh, I think is the lack of it, especially in you know the 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 exorcism itself. Yeah, I can't really gush enough about it. It's just watching it this other time. And I knew I liked it. I knew I liked it a lot. Uh, but it just I was kind of over the moon with it this time, and and it is just a fantastic film.
I also love the way that so many people get roped into it, you know, doctors and so forth, and priests, different priests that are all talking about ways they would or wouldn't deal with this situation, and how the church itself has evolved beyond exorcism and not believing the situation, essentially.
Right.
All these people not believing the situation, even sometimes when they witness some crazy things. But it it's amazing how the movie has that feel of you can almost see the outsider's perspective
Yeah.
and see how isolated it feels too. Like even though Chris is bringing all these people in, witness her daughter and trying to help her daughter, there's all this kind of beyond the commotion, the rationalization that's happening, and watching all the medical practices and stuff is some of the scariest parts of the movie too. Sometimes, you know,
Yeah. Definitely.
just the handling of the these big machines that are loud and the blood spurting, and with the doctor, it's terrifying in and of itself. Just seeing that part of it, and also understanding that it's not going to make a difference. Yeah, just the natural way that they try to rationalize everything, and how at the end of the day, how would anybody believe that this had happened? Just seeing this mother and daughter leaving and being like, oh, by the way, this insanity just happened. And sure, people know the tragedy happened, that several people died,
Right.
but they wouldn't know. Oh, and there was a demon, and the complete gravity of the situation would be lost to almost everybody. I just like the way that it's isolated and not at the same time. Basically, the way that horror could be happening in your next door neighbor's home, theoretically, and you wouldn't know about it or believe it necessarily. That's just such an interesting notion too. And I like the way the movie deals with that.
Right.
But yeah, definitely an A plus movie and a classic of its kind.